My grandpa stood at the edge of the newly erected fence. His shoulders slumped in a way I'd never seen before, a flimsy no trespassing sign mocking the quiet grief on his face. He'd walked down to that lake every single morning for 50 years, a ritual as sacred as the sunrise. And now some petty homeowners association, led by Brenda, a woman whose entire existence seemed dedicated to making other people miserable, had cut him off. Are you kidding me? A retired man who served his country can't walk to a public lake? The quiet fury building inside me was the worst kind, cold knot in my stomach. The air tasted heavy with the scent of freshly cut pine from that damn fence and the sharp, clean water of the lake I could no longer get to. It was a slap in the face. My grandpa, a man who survived so much, was now defeated by a suburban tyrant and her clipboard. What a joke. I remember him sighing, a long, weary exhalation that carried all the weight of his years, a sound that snapped something inside of me. I won't lie, seeing that made my blood boil. It was one thing to mess with me, but another entirely to hurt a good man like him over something so absurd. The next day, I went to the homeowners association meeting, a perfectly manicured battlefield of passive aggression and fake smiles. Brenda, with her perfectly coiffed hair and a smile that didn't reach her eyes, held court. She spoke in that sickeningly sweet voice, dripping with faux concern about liability issues and maintaining property values. I saw her glance at the plans for her prized rose garden, a sprawling, immaculate thing she'd just had installed. She mentioned something about the new irrigation system being state-of-the-art. Oh, really? An idea, terrible, magnificent one, began to form, a low thrum of excitement mixed with pure, unadulterated rage. I started doing my homework, digging through old county records, poring over blueprints that looked like they were drawn by hand. I discovered something incredible. Long before this place was an HOA-infested suburb, it was a farm, and its old owner, a friend of my grandpa's, had built a surprisingly intricate, mostly forgotten system of trenches and diversion channels to pull water from a small, unnamed tributary stream that fed into the main lake. This ancient network was still mostly intact, overgrown and obscured by decades of new construction and landscaping. I found an old, brittle map in my grandpa's shed, a thing he'd drawn as a teenager, showing exactly where the old channels were. He always knew everything about the land around here, didn't he? He was a living map. Brenda's fancy new irrigation system wasn't truly state-of-the-art at all. It was just a modern pump connected to one of the old, original channels, which, turned out, was the primary water source for all the HOA's show gardens, including her own. A tiny, devious smile crept across my face. I had a plan, and it was going to be beautiful. What do they say? Don't mess with a man's home, or in this case, a man's lake access. That night, under the cold, silent moon, I put on my work boots, grabbed a few old shovels, and went to work. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth and the distant scent of night-blooming jasmine from Brenda's pristine garden. I could hear the faint, rhythmic whir of her new pump, a sound that was just begging to be silenced. I located the hidden channel, a ditch barely a foot deep, and started digging. It was backbreaking work, but with every shovelful of mud and roots I moved, I felt a release, a surge of power I hadn't known I possessed. The plan was simple. I wouldn't stop the flow. No, that would be too obvious. Instead, I would divert it, redirecting the stream's flow away from the HOA's carefully manicured gardens and back into an old, forgotten, low-lying section of the original farmland that sat right on the edge of Brenda's property. My grandpa's map had a small note on it that said, "Natural spring here, always wet." That was my target. I worked for hours, the sweat dripping down my face, the only sounds the rustle of leaves and the steady thwump of my shovel hitting wet ground. The subtwist? I wasn't just rerouting the water. I was digging deeper, lower, creating a permanent new path, a new, unintended drainage system. This wasn't a temporary fix. This was a geological change. The next few weeks were pure cinema. First, nothing. Brenda's garden glowed under the sun. Then, a subtle shift. A few patches of grass in her yard began to look strangely lush, a little too green. I saw her walking the perimeter, a puzzled expression on her face. Then, the real fun started. Her perfectly sculpted rose garden started to look waterlogged, the soil a dark, muddy brown. She called the landscapers, and they tried to fix it, but nothing worked. The ground was just too soft, too saturated. It was glorious. Then came the phone calls, the frantic homeowners association emails. Other homeowners' yards started to follow suit. Small ponds appeared on the corners of their lawns. The smell of stagnant, swampy water began to permeate the air where once there was only the scent of fresh-cut grass and roses. Brenda's perfect life, her precious gardens, were literally turning into a swamp. One morning, I saw her golf cart stuck in a new mud bog in the middle of her driveway. She was yelling into her phone, her face a mask of rage and disbelief. It was a beautiful sight. The final meeting was a spectacle. Brenda, red-faced and sputtering, pointed her finger at me, accusing me of sabotage. I just sat there, calm as a lake, and let her finish. She had no proof, just a gut feeling. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up and pulled out the old map. I explained, in a calm, clear voice, about the old channels, the natural springs, and how the new and improved Homeowners Association irrigation system had simply disrupted a delicate, decades-old natural balance. I said, "You moved the water, Brenda, and the land just moved with it. You can't fence off a lake and expect the water to just sit there and behave." The other homeowners stared at her, then at their own sinking lawns. Their outrage at me had turned on her, the woman who had caused this whole mess with her petty rules. Her obsession with a few feet of shoreline had cost them all their manicured lawns, their property values, their peace of mind. Brenda was voted out of her position that very night, her reign of terror over. The fences came down a week later. The lesson? You can build fences and write rules. You can try to control nature and people, but ultimately, the water and justice will find its own way. My grandpa and I walked to the lake the next morning, the sun on our faces, the sound of the waves a song of quiet victory. Some things are just meant to be, and sometimes, takes a little swamp to make things right.